Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to speak to the part of you that's tired of waiting for permission, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for life to finally make sense. What if I told you that everything could begin to change the moment you decide to act as if everything always works out for you? Not because you're ignoring reality, but because you're choosing to reshape it from the inside out. This isn't fantasy, it's psychological strategy. When you act as if everything always works out for you, you're not just engaging in blind optimism or positive thinking for the sake of emotional comfort. You're engaging in a radical psychological shift, one that rewires the way your nervous system interprets reality. Because here's the hard truth most people avoiding. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as you are. Your beliefs about yourself, about others, about what's possible don't just color your perception, they construct it. Deserve a seat? There's a mechanism in the brain called the reticular activating system. Think of it like the gatekeeper of your consciousness. It filters out the billions of bits of information flooding your senses every second and decides what to focus on. But it doesn't decide randomly. It focuses on what you've taught it to look for. If you constantly believe that life is unfair, that people are out to get you, that things never work out, then your brain becomes a soldier of that narrative. It will highlight every setback, every rejection, every inconvenience as evidence that you're right. And once you feel right, you stop questioning whether you're also trapped. This is the great psychological trap of our age, the belief that our feelings reflect reality. But feelings are not facts. They're reflections of internal models. Models built from your past, your trauma, your conditioning. When you act as if everything is working out, you're not deluding yourself. You're retraining your nervous system to notice alignment, to look for the signal in the noise, and to stay open to what might go right. That's a different kind of power. It's not rooted in certainty, it's rooted in trust. People think their worldview is based on truth, but more often, it's based on emotional survival. If you grew up expecting betrayal, you'll filter every interaction through the lens of suspicion. If you were rewarded for playing small, you'll interpret opportunity as danger. This is how perception becomes prison. But the moment you begin to act as if life is unfolding for you, not to you, that prison starts to crack. And here's the paradox. Your perception doesn't just reflect your reality, it shapes it. Psychologists call this the self-fulfilling prophecy. You expect rejection, so you act guarded. You act guarded, so others withdraw. Others withdraw, and you feel rejected. Round and round it goes, until someone chooses to step outside the loop. Acting as if everything works out is how you break the loop. It's how you interrupt the feedback mechanism and insert a new code, one built on courage, not fear. Now, this isn't about pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. It's about holding a higher orientation even in the face of chaos. Think about the great leaders, visionaries, survivors, the people history remembers. What made them remarkable wasn't that they had easier lives. What made them powerful was their capacity to choose their lens, to see possibility in pain, to read rejection as redirection, to find meaning where others saw only madness. That's not delusion, that's discipline. The truth is, your mindset isn't neutral. It's either preparing you to expand or conditioning you to shrink. And when you act as if everything works out, you're choosing to expand. Psychologically, spiritually, and even physiologically. You breathe deeper. You make better decisions. You recover from stress faster. This isn't just spiritual talk, it's neurobiology. Your body responds to your story. So the question becomes, what kind of story are you willing to live inside of? What's dangerous isn't being wrong. It's being committed to being right about a reality that's slowly killing your spirit. So maybe the smarter question isn't, is this mindset true? Maybe the smarter question is, what would change in me if I lived as though it were? Because often, transformation begins before the evidence shows up. The mindset comes first, the proof follows. Acting as if everything always works out for you doesn't mean you'll avoid difficulty. It means you'll stop interpreting difficulty as defeat. It means you'll start walking through life with your eyes open to opportunity, your heart open to mystery, and your mind trained to search for alignment instead of attack. The idea that confidence should come after evidence is one of the most deeply embedded, yet quietly destructive assumptions in our culture. We're taught, often from childhood, that we must earn belief in ourselves, that we need to see results first, a successful outcome, approval, a green light from the world, before we allow ourselves to move forward with conviction. But that mindset is inverted. It's backward, because in truth, confidence isn't the result of success. It's the foundation of it. To act as if everything always works out for you requires an almost rebellious kind of faith. Not in fate, not in some guaranteed outcome, but in your ability to face and shape whatever arises. And that faith, that inner certainty, isn't passive. It's a discipline, a psychological posture. It's the ability to step forward before you have all the data, before the timing is perfect, before you feel completely ready. Because the uncomfortable truth eyes you, you won't feel ready. Not at first. And if you wait until you do, you've already forfeited the opportunity. This is where courage becomes the catalyst. Not the loud, theatrical kind, but the quieter, daily courage to risk failure in pursuit of something meaningful. You see, most people are trained to seek safety, psychological safety, social safety, emotional safety. And there's a place for that, of course. But if safety becomes your North Star, growth becomes impossible, because every significant transformation requires you to step into the unknown, into the chaotic space between who you are and who you could be. And that space is never comfortable. This is one of the people's why people stagnate. Not because they're lazy or incapable, but because they've learned to only move when they feel certain, when they feel validated. But certainty is not the starting point, it's the reward. You build certainty through the act of movement, through facing what is uncertain with conviction. That's what makes faith powerful. Not because it's blind, but because it insists on forward motion despite incomplete information. Think of how this plays out in your life. You hesitate to apply for the job because you don't know if you'll get it. You hold back from the conversation because you don't know how it will be received. You avoid launching the project, ending the relationship, making the call. All because you've been conditioned to believe that certainty must precede action. But that's not how reality works. It's through action that new realities emerge. It's through stepping into risk that you begin to discover the depth of your own resilience. This doesn't mean you move carelessly. It means you move intentionally, despite the inner noise, despite the resistance. In fact, the presence of that resistance is usually the clearest signal that you're on the edge of something important. Psychologically speaking, your brain is hardwired to avoid risk and conserve energy. It will invent excuses, doubts, worst-case scenarios, all in the name of self-preservation. But if you listen to that voice as the voice of truth, you will stay small. Not because life demanded it, but because fear convinced you it was necessary. Here's where this ties back to the original premising. When you act as if everything always out for you, you're training yourself to step boldly before the proof arrives. And that shift, from waiting to moving, is what separates those who wish for transformation from those who embody it. You begin to carry yourself differently. You speak with more clarity. You trust your instincts, and others feel it, because energy precedes words, action precedes results, and conviction precedes confirmation. What's fascinating is how the external world starts to respond differently, not because it suddenly becomes easier, but because you've become stronger. You walk into the room like you belong there, and suddenly you do. You pitch the idea like it has value, and it starts to gain traction. You stop outsourcing your confidence to outcomes and start building it from the inside out. That changes everything, not because life becomes predictable, but because you become adaptable. And so, the choice is laid bearing. Do you live according to the evidence of your past? Or do you dare to move forward as if something greater is possible, even when there's no guarantee? Because here's the uncomfortable but liberating truth. Your life will expand in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty you're willing to face without retreat. Most people think change begins with action, that if they just push harder, hustle more, force themselves into new habits, they'll somehow become someone different. But what they don't realize is this action doesn't precede identity. Identity drives action. You will always behave in alignment with who you believe yourself to be. That's the invisible gravity pulling your decisions, your emotions, even your limits into orbit. So when you act as if everything always works out for you, you're not just changing behavior. You're rewriting the character you're playing in the story of your life. Think of it this way. If deep down you see yourself as someone who's someone who's always almost there, but never quite makes it, someone the world passes over, then your actions, no matter how determined or strategic they appear, will be colored by that internal script. You'll sabotage good opportunities, hesitate in critical moments, or shrink yourself just enough to avoid standing fully in your power. And then you'll call that your reality, unaware that you were the one keeping it alive all along. This is where things get existential, because the most powerful transformation doesn't begin with changing your circumstances. It begins with confronting your self-concept and asking, honestly, who have I been pretending to be? More importantly, who would I need to become for everything to actually work out for me? That's not a surface-level question. That's a psychological confrontation, because it forces you to look at how much of your life is a performance of limitation, a rehearsed identity built for safety, not for truth. And truth, real truth, demands evolution. You can't keep showing up as the same version of yourself and expect a different experience. If your outcomes haven't changed, chances are your identity hasn't either. It doesn't matter how much you desire transformation. If you still identify as the person who fails, the person who gets overlooked, the one who's not ready yet, then your behavior will mirror that identity and your life will follow suit. Now here's the catch. Identity isn't something you wait to discover. It's something you decide to embody. You don't find yourself. You build yourself. And one of the most radical things you can do is to start behaving as if you are already the person who wins, not the person who wants to win, not the person who's trying, the person who does. You start thinking how they would think, walking how they would walk, saying no to what they'd reject, saying yes to what they'd chase. This isn't delusion. It's integrity, because your future self isn't some imaginary figure. They're a blueprint, a projection of what's possible when your behavior aligns with your potential. When you act as if things always work out for you, what you're really doing is aligning with that future self now. You stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for proof. You start leading with identity, and the world starts adjusting to match it. You see this principle everywhere, especially in people who seem to attract success effortlessly. A seat. It's not that they're smarter or luckier. It's that they've integrated the identity of someone who succeeds, and because they carry themselves that way, opportunities recognize them. People respond to them differently. Life begins to mirror the self-image they've internalized. But don't confuse this with arrogance. Deserves a seat. This isn't about pretending you're better than others. It's about refusing to pretend you're less than what you are. It's about standing in a truth deeper than your past. A truth that says you were built to evolve, that you're allowed to outgrow your previous limitations, that you're allowed to discard old identities, even if they kept you safe once, and step into a version of yourself that feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and absolutely necessary. That's the friction of transformation. It's not easy. In fact, it's deeply destabilizing. You'll question yourself. Others may question you, but you keep showing up anyway, as if the version of you that succeeds already exists, because they do. They're waiting for you to stop pretending to be someone else. The world doesn't respond to who you were. It responds to who you've decided to become. There's a strange thing about reality that most people miss. And it's this: life doesn't just respond to your effort, it responds to your energy. Not the vague New Age idea of vibes, but something more precise. The way your internal posture, your belief, your orientation toward experience alters the way the world moves around you. When you act as if everything always works out for you, what you're really doing is shifting the frequency of your presence. And that shift matters more than people realize. Most of us are taught to chase outcomes, to force them, to manipulate every variable, control every detail, optimize every process. And if we do it right, then maybe we'll finally arrive at some version of peace. But here's the contradiction: the more desperately you need something to work out, the more likely you are to repel it. Why? Because desperation communicates distrust. And life, or the structure of reality, if you want to be more clinical, has a peculiar way of testing those who approach it in fear. It's as if life asks, "Do you trust me?" And most people say yes with their words, but no with their behavior. Micromanage, they overthink, they second guess, they cling. And in doing so, they send a signal: I believe the worst is more likely than the best. So life reflects that back, not because it's cruel, but because it's consistent. Reality mirrors your internal framework. Your expectations don't just live in your head. They shape how you interpret events, how you act, how others respond, and what outcomes you end up producing. Now, this isn't to say you shouldn't care. Of course, you care, but caring and clutching aren't the same thing. In fact, the most effective people, the ones who seem to glide through chaos with calm, aren't the ones who are indifferent. They're the ones who have mastered the art of non-attachment. They act with precision, they move with purpose, but they're not enslaved by the result. They've internalized something most people never even realizing: that life often delivers what you desire after you stop trying to control it. This is the paradox of surrender, and surrender, by the way, is not passive. It's not about doing nothing. It's about doing everything you can from a place of inner steadiness. And then releasing the need for a specific outcome. Ever deserves a seat, that's what acting as if everything always works out really means. It means living with a posture of trust even when you don't yet have the evidence. It means assuming the delay has intelligence, that the closed door is a redirect, not a rejection. It means reading reality symbolically, not just literally. And that shift from force to flow, from anxiety to alignment, changes everything. You start taking action from a place of internal freedom, not fear. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop negotiating with the world from a place of lack and start communicating from a place of grounded presence. People feel that. And so does life, but this takes maturity. Psychological maturity. Because letting go of control requires you to face your deepest fear sets. What if it doesn't work out? What if I get hurt again? What if I waste my time? These questions are real, and they're valid, but they're not helpful. They are the voice of your past, disguised as wisdom. And unless you learn to ignore that voice, not by denying it, but by overriding it, you'll never step fully into your future. In the end, the people who live lives of meaning, peace, and momentum aren't those who had the easiest paths. They're the ones who had the deepest inner permission to trust the process, to trust themselves, to trust life. They weren't just reacting to circumstances. They were creating reality by the way they carried themselves through it. So stop gripping so tightly. Stop needing everything to make sense before you move. Let go of the illusion that control guarantees safety, because it doesn't. What guarantees growth is trust. Not naive hope, but disciplined trust. The kind that allows you to breathe through uncertainty and still take the next step. The kind that signals to life, I'm ready. Not because I know what's coming, but because I know who I am. And that's the final challenge. Can you walk as if the ground will rise to meet you, even when you can't see it yet? Because more often than not, it does. But only for the one who keeps walking.